Game Dev Tycoon is a game where you run a game development company. You start by making games in your mom's garage during the 80s, and for some reason she's charging you $8K in rent. What the hell, Mom? As the gaming landscape changes, you make more games, research better technologies, and new platforms are introduced. If you do pretty well with a game, you're able to move into a new office space and hire a couple of friends, as well as Sharron. You can do contracts for extra quiche, publishing deals to get more fans, and make the greatest game ever, followed up by 10 more subpar sequels. There are the highs of the romance RPG adventure Fabio the Game, and the lows of Tit. But by the end of game dev, you're loaded with cash, your company has their own console, and you've made your mark on video game history. It's such a simple concept for a game, but it does business management simulation so well. I've been able to put 90 hours into this game because I just have this urge every 6 months to play through it again. So, for a couple of minutes, I'm just going to gush about why Game Dev Tycoon is a great example of how to make a single player game with replayability. Alright, so this first reason's a little bit off topic, but I have to mention the story of how Game Dev Tycoon got made. Back in 2011, two brothers, both software developers, set out to make this game under the studio name Greenheart Games. After a modest release on the Windows Store, they released the PC version in 2013. But for a bit of an experiment on video game piracy, they also posted a version of the game to torrenting sites. Now, there wasn't much different between the two versions of the game, except this cracked version was programmed so players would start to have an issue in their virtual companies, specifically piracy. Over time, more and more copies of each released game were pirated, and eventually the player would go bankrupt and the game would end. The irony was palpable as players went to forums asking for help on how to deal with the in-game piracy problem. After just the first day, Greenheart Games saw that 93.6% of users had downloaded the cracked version and only 6.4% had actually bought the game. The company made a blog post about the whole experiment, and the next day, the story about how this indie company tricked pirating gamers blew up. They were greenlit by Steam, and the game went on to become a success. For any single-player game, the pacing is incredibly important. I'd rather take a super tight and interesting 3-hour campaign over a game with 10 hours of great gameplay and 10 hours of monotony. If I'm going to play alone, closed off, hiding from the world, I want it to do a good job keeping my attention. If a game is well paced throughout the entire game, from the beginning, middle, and to the end, it makes replaying it even more enjoyable. With games that rely on carrying you through a story or campaign, sometimes replays and certain parts of the game can feel a lot slower than your original playthrough. Or if it's a good enough narrative, just makes you feel like you're rewatching one of your favorite movies. Even for games without a real story or plot, multiple playthroughs tend to show more and more of a game's pacing weaknesses. You look at a game like Civ. It's an incredible game, especially Civ 5, and I've sunk so many hours into playing it by myself and with friends, but after that initial honeymoon phase, the late game has since always felt like such a drag. It's so slow, there's too many troops, there's nothing new to find. I just want someone to get the win, and it means half the games I start, I don't even finish. On the other hand, game dev is like a lubed up penguin. Every new company you start, the first game is going to be fun, but it's your first hit game that really gets you sucked in. You're constantly working towards personal goals. To move to a better office, hire the best people, make mad stacks, and ultimately try to make the perfect game. It's just the right balance between never getting bored or overwhelmed throughout an entire playthrough. If you feel like there are too many moving parts, you can always just focus on games and cut funding to the research center. Or, even better, fire Sharron. I even have a friend that keeps his company in the garage for the entire playthrough. He never moves to a new office. I don't really know why, he hasn't been diagnosed, but the important thing is he's allowed to play the game how he wants. My only real complaint about this game is the ending is kind of lame. After 35 years of sweat producing countless classic games, and not even taking a single vacation, while simultaneously not aging a bit, all that happens is you're given a score. I don't care about numbers unless there's a $sign in front of them. At the end of the game, let me sell the company. Let me quit from the business, take my money, and start a family in the wild. Just let me die of a heart attack. I want something, even if random, that ties off the end of the game. Please let me know if there is a mod that does this. Game dev's core game never really updates, but the mod community gives you tons of options. There's little UI changes that just make the game better. There's also a great mod that adds competitors. There's a mod where at the beginning of the game you can take a $10 million loan, invest that with another mod into silver, and then a month later get 150% back on that investment and buy up all of your competitors. I don't recommend this strat though, because sometimes you forget when your loan is due and you end up going bankrupt because all of your cash is in oil. The mods range from genuine improvements to the ridiculous, but they're all fun and make future playthroughs even more enjoyable. Now, as a simulation/strategy game, it doesn't really rely on a gripping story or really much in terms of gameplay. Instead, it takes advantage of the player's creativity and their human desires, something that all games can benefit from. Like I said before, I like my money, so when a game with a silly name does super well and makes me my first $10 million, I do a little happy dance. Just the chance of making a hit encourages me to put love and care into every slider and every game. You just combine a genre with the topic, come up with a funny name or premise, try to figure out what's important to focus on, and see how your game does. Some games will be a success, and for those that fail, you can always blame Sharron. You can be as risky as you want, or try to invest in the best technologies. You can choose to focus your company only around certain genres, like you're the next Telltale Games, RIP. Or I guess there's the option of never leaving the garage. Game Dev Tycoon is really just an interface. It's nothing special, but it enables your creativity and lets you project your own emotions and meaning into a game. Because so much of the game experience actually comes from you, the player, it feels familiar, but still fun every time you come back to play it. If your game doesn't have a gripping story, you either need bomb-ass gameplay, or you need your player to personally invest in the game. I am straight up scared to play Stardew Valley because I've heard of people losing months to that game. For me, Game Dev is the perfect game to pick up again, play for a couple hours, and then put it back on the virtual shelf for the next time. It's $10 on Steam. I think it's also on iOS and Android. If you want to try the game out, I'd add it to your wish list. Every once in a while, I see it on sale. And if you get just one fun playthrough out of it, then I think it's worth the couple of bucks. And now, without further ado, I present to you some of my greatest creations.